Welcome to the November 1st, can you believe it? Finance and Legal Guild of the Lifeboat Academy. This whole time business is just timey-wimey. We had a rescheduling of our last regular meeting with a kind of half meeting in between. And I think today will be the second half of a half meeting. And then we will just sort of orient ourselves uh, and figure out what the next steps are. So the intention for this meeting is kind of an abbreviated update on developments and then just a little bit of refinement of what our next steps look like, agreement about that, and then moving on from there. So with that, I'm going to just go quickly once around just to make sure, give everyone a chance just to say hi and check in. And does that agenda sound reasonable? And is there anything else that you want to make sure that we cover today? So Roland, over to you, and then over to Becca.
Looking forward to the updates because I don't know if we are set for the second part of the half meeting, but we'll see. I think I'm good with just updates today. Yeah, I am feeling actually, I just wanted to say I'm actually feeling like it's November 1st. I feel like I am actually grounded in the season and I am in terms of the business calendar, it might be surprising, but in terms of how I'm feeling on this land in this place at this time, I actually feel like I'm pretty well grounded. So over to Becca.
Um, I am good with that agenda. Yeah, I didn't sleep much last night, and I have my brother from California is coming in this afternoon to canvas for the weekend, and there's a bar mitzvah that I'm helping with tomorrow, and so I've been cooking and dealing with the broken thermostat and dealing with a broken political system, and so all of that.
Yep. All right. Um, well, okay, so let's start with, and actually, I can split the difference between I feel like I'm where I need to be in the season, and the numbers on the calendars continue to shock me. It's just a perpetual sort of, it's I feel like everything is moving forward, as it should. And how do these numbers change so quickly? It's just confusing. Anyhow, so updates. Um, there are a couple different categories of updates, and I'll start with the most bylaw oriented ones, and kind of move from there. So I had a meeting with Michelle Sadler from Stocksy, who looked at our bylaws, and we had a really productive, incredible. She clearly is a person who just loves co-ops and um, wants to be helpful and wants to share the experience that they've had. And in that conversation, there were two specific things that she wanted to talk to me about. And there was also a broader takeaway that helped click some things into place for me. The two things that she pointed out, one was in our sort of conflict resolution, the member termination section, we had a line about following our conflict resolution process. And her advice was, don't put that in there. And they have had experience where they've had to terminate members. So they've had two, I think she said two cases or three cases recently where that's happened. When it does happen, it's often because of uh, egregious behavior on the part of the member. And in the bylaws, if you put in something like following our conflict resolution process, you now have added a layer of litigation potential, because now they can say, well, you didn't do it exactly like you said you were doing it in your other bylaws or in your other agreements. And that kind of prompted the bigger aha for me, which is the role of the bylaws. There's two parts and they're equally connected. The main one is limiting legal liability. Like that's the main thing that the only two things that we're doing is we are creating a space where behavior can happen, where actions can be taken by the board or the organization. So we are enabling what can happen, and we are limiting our liability around if disagreements or conflicts or things come up. And the how we actually do things is a totally different document. Like the bylaws are really about this kind of legal structure, this legal container. And then the culture and the processes that we talk about are how things actually work. So she was saying, you're not getting rid of your conflict resolution process. You're still following it. That's still your policy, but you just don't reference it in the bylaws. And generally it's still referenced, everything's done according to the agreements. And you just don't need to make that sort of specific of a notation on it. Anyhow, that logic of this is really thinking about legal exposure and legal enabling of what the board is allowed to do. And we may allow the board to do more than we think the board will ever do, but the board's not forced to do it. And really the question becomes, do we trust our board? And do we trust the process by which the board is created? Or, do we trust the processes that we have outlined? If so, then we want to make sure that we're limiting our liability. We're limiting also what the board can do that would get us in trouble. But so that was a really useful takeaway. And the second thing that we talked about was the actual structure of the Stewardship Council. And we have it set up differently than most organizations because you generally want to limit the number of people on your board of directors. The more people, the more contentious it can get, the harder it is to make decisions, etc. In our case, though, the board or the Stewardship Council is really trying to model the commons. And we also have a different decision-making structure. We have consent built into the decision-making structure. So this is actually one of those things to be aware of as we are putting people on. So the way that we're currently structured, we can have between 4 and 16 people on the Stewardship Council. And the idea with the upper limit was one person representing each footprint. And that it's supposed to be working as a commons under consent. So that's it's almost like there's one representative for each footprint showing up. But it is a consideration. The more traditional way to do it would be to limit the number of people on the Stewardship Council or / board. And it's just that was what she was pointing out, and we knew that going into it, that this was kind of an unconventional format for it, but it's worth a conversation. So that was the feedback from Michelle. And I've also put wheels in motion to talk with the people who hosted the Community Land Trust Summit. So I've got an email out to them basically saying we're looking at forming a co-op and doing a community land trust. Would you provide some technical services, some advice? And they are willing, and they're just figuring out who's the right person to do that. So they're having kind of an internal conversation about who takes the meeting with us, but that's in the works. And in terms of next steps, actually, that leads to are we comfortable now with the version of the bylaws of sharing them out to young agrarians to is Amy Doe? at Young Agrarians, who's their co-op person. And there's I was thinking of One Straw Revolution, or One Straw Society, who is um, starting that conversation around land trusts, agricultural land trusts. Talking to them, Young Agrarians, um, the Community Land Trust Summit folk. And I think there might be one other group in there that are kind of like tech. Heather has a connection. Lauren from Blueberry Farm, Blueberry Commons. So that's one of those. I think the next step is I would like to get approval if it's I'm not sure exactly what kind of a process we want to use, but basically approval to share our bylaws with more people, the draft form, um, to get their feedback. And likewise talking about when do we engage the lawyers next around this. And so those are sort of two items on the next steps. The other two meetings that I took this week that are relevant here is I met with Christina, I can't remember her last name now, from Social Roots. And I just met this morning with Alex from Peerdom. Social Roots is meant to be a social change maker network platform. And I ended up having an over 2 hour meeting, actually like a 2.5 hour meeting with Christina from Social Roots. So I learned a lot. And what they are doing, they are still working on a piece of software. They have a beta version, and they're looking for early testers, early users of the software, and they are seeking additional funding to take it from a beta to a full-blown model. And the beta is completely functional, but the beta is functional at its core, but doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles added to it. And so it does what it needs to do, but it can grow into, more. And part of the reason why they're looking for kind of early tester groups is to get real life feedback on which of these bells and whistles are desirable. And um, the thing that's kind of interesting in terms of bylaws is she's already starting to try to connect us with other groups that are already involved in Social Roots and people that might be lifeboat builders. And she's talked about how, like, if I can get her on, if we can set up our Social Roots network, she can start to pull people that are already involved in the network from other ways who might be interested in what we're doing. And so really that's kind of motivation for getting something together that we can start to introduce people to. And likewise, Peerdom is it's an org chart org chart software designed for sociocracy organized groups. And it is it's so cool. It's beautiful and functional, and they're continuing to develop it, but it is a robust, tool. And it really is a really good visual representation of the organizational structure. So and including like so I have been when I haven't been in meetings, I've been cleaning up our documents, and not just the bylaws, but the operational agreements. And part of what their software does is all of those kind of policy things can be included right in the software. So you can kind of click through, look at the organizational structure, click through to the documents that lay out the driver statement and things like that. So there's a real, like, obvious connection between how we are structuring ourselves and then how they could represent the structure. So again, it could be a very useful sales device, right? To be able to say, here's what you are buying into. This is what the organization looks like. This is how it works. And it's visually so coherent that it saves a lot of trying to describe the structure. Instead, you can actually just, here's the structure, and here's, where you would fit into the structure. And I just had that meeting literally this morning at 8 o'clock. And um, the downside with peerdom is that it's a pay for service. And so we would have to figure out, although it's a pay for service, but they give you a 15% deduction if you're a nonprofit, which we would count for, a 10% reduction if you make your map public, which we would want to do anyhow, and another 10% if you make a commitment for 2 years or more. And they have you can kind of pay per item, but then they've got a eat all you want category, which is, you know, um, which I want because all of the apps and everything that they have are really brilliant. So I think that's it for the updates, because I mentioned also part of the update is that I think the documentation is pretty much cleaned up. There's updating old numbers and some old language in the documents, but I think that the documents that we have listed in the bylaws and in the agreements match up. So I'm going to stop there and go around first to Roland to see if there's any updates that you want to add that I've missed or questions, and then over to Becca for questions and or additions.
I have that was a really good overview update. And one of the things I want to ask is, do we want to go into any depth in discussing the bylaws today, or just sort of like take questions and then think about them? So essentially, how do we want to use our time together to keep that in mind? So things that came up for me was I like that, and I think that we have actually already started to talk about it, and then to get from Michelle kind of the confirmation that the bylaws are not the be all and end all, that there's the operating manual and other documents that are equally used. So what does the bylaw actually need to do? So I was really interested in hearing what you were thinking around that. I was wondering about the whole question about, do we trust the board? I think is a really interesting one in terms of, is there anything that we could put in the bylaw, or is that where we would put something about if there's a loss of, what is it that they say for governments, if there's a loss of confidence in the board, is there anything that the membership can do?
Yeah, it's already in there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was asking the question in case it was already something there, because as we all know, I am not the one who retains all of this information, and I look to others for help with that. In terms of giving feedback or asking for more feedback from different groups, do we from the conversation, when do we talk about and make changes from feedback before sending the document out for more feedback? Like you've had this conversation with Michelle for any changes that we might want to do to the bylaw. Do we do that now before sending it out, or do we send it out as it is to get more feedback, to see if other people pick up on the same things, or have, so when do we want to to work through potential changes if we're gathering data from feedback from other people. And in terms of peerdom, and as a paid for service, is it replacing anything that we already have, or would it be adding something to a suite of things that we're already paying for as well? And is it filling a gap? So those are the things that came up for me for during the update. So I will pass to Becca.
Yeah, I think it's great that you had those meetings, and I'm all for having the rules be as stripped down as possible in terms of creating the container and limiting risk, liability, and maybe even paring down the number of people on the stewardship council. When you were talking about that, it suddenly occurred to me that having 16, the 16 footprint thing as part of the reason for that might not quite logically make sense in terms of that tying it to a particular piece of land that we think can sustain 16 footprints. I guess I wasn't aware that that was a reason for the 16, and then it was kind of cool, but then it was like, wait a minute, isn't that land specific? So, and as far as sharing yet, I think it would be good to clean it up a little. I mean, maybe you've already cleaned it up since I last saw it, but to incorporate the feedback to the extent that we are in agreement about it before sending it on to other people. Although, obviously, it's fine to have it, as long as it's a draft. But I think a draft with a ton of comments would be confusing. And yeah, I mean, just glancing at the peerdom thing, I can see why you like it. It looks cool. And I think Roland's questions, I second those questions, like, because I know money is tight, and because I know playing with software can be so fun. And yeah, rabbit hole and also like introducing more software that not everyone is gonna have, like the learning curve might be an issue for people, but yeah, if it replaces something or fills I mean, I do the gap that I thought I heard you speaking to that might be good to fill is this one where we're like trying to diagram the thing for the layers of people who come in and ourselves, and if it would streamline that, might be worth it. Is a peer a person in their model? So £5 per month per peer,
Yeah.
a person.
Yeah. It's there are guest seats and then there are member seats. So a peer is like a member that has you can have guests where they can see things but they can't do anything. And then a peer is somebody who can actually go in and change, add information, change information.
So we wouldn't need very many of those to start with.
Probably not. No. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in.
Okay. I think that's all. Yeah. I mean, the cautiousness about new software also applies to the beta version of Social Roots.
Yeah.
But if it comes with real connections with new people that are like-minded, it might be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you get a haircut?
I did. Yes.
Oh, it looks great. Very.
I've decided I need a haircut at least every 5 years. That's my absolute limit.
Keep looking. over to you.
Cool. Okay, so this is all really good. I think one of the things we can do with here's what I'm going to propose in terms of the sharing out is I can create a separate copy that I'll create and I've cleaned up all of the formatting stuff, right? So the numbering should be right and the references or cross references, all that stuff is cleaned up. Where there are a couple places where there are still comments around things we should talk through. Um, uh, but what I can easily do is create a share copy where it'll be the cleaned up version as it is right now, minus all the comments. And that's what we can share with other people. And then we can layer in the comments that we're receiving and review that as a group. Right. Um, so I think then it makes sense that we can use, I think the how do we actually receive those changes is a really good one. So that's what I'm going to propose is that we sort of have one document that is just for sharing to other people, and then we can, as a guild, talk it through what we're hearing from um, the different folks. Um, in terms of the software, I mean, I'm trying to, and I don't have any, how do I want to say this right? I have on my to-do list stepping back and thinking about software in general and what are the actual, right now we use a whole bunch of independent software things. We use MailChimp and Buffer and Google Docs and Miro boards and all this kind of Asana and um, trying to figure out how they fit together so there isn't redundancy and we're only paying for what we really need is part of the work. I think Peerdom doesn't replace any, well, I guess in a way what Peerdom replaces is Google Docs as the manual. It gives a different way of accessing the policy manual and the organization diagram. So but in that sense, I don't think it would replace Google Docs entirely, but it would replace Google for that particular thing. So I think it's really more filling a gap in terms of a nice presentation of that information. And I'm also thinking of it as a kind of a teaching tool. Um, I don't want to go too much into the weeds, but one of the features is you can take they call them drafts, and but you can save templates for different kinds of structures. So one of the things we could do is for somebody starting a lifeboat, we could actually duplicate our structure for them and let them play with it for how they want to set their structure up. And Peerdom is open to partnerships in terms of like if we are starting to channel, if part of our recommendation is while you're setting up your lifeboat, you might want to think about Peerdom because it works for us and here's what it does. And they're open to, sort of partnerships that way. And the same, anyhow, I think your points, both of you making the same point is, I agree. We have to be really careful about, I need to be really careful about rabbit holes. And I think we need to be really strategic about how we use the software. And this is actually what I didn't share this part, but what Social Roots, um, they're really smart. There's a lot of thinking that's gone into it, and including the uh, the short form is in social movements and online social communities. There's this consistent 1, 9, and 90 division. So you get 1% of the community who are really active and keep everything going. You get 9% who show up occasionally, help occasionally, do some stuff. And you get 90% of people who are just sort of hanging out. And, they're shopping around and they're looking for something new and interesting, but they're not really engaged in the work. And they notice this especially in social movements. And what they're trying to promote is a kind of a chain. And they, one of the challenges that they found is that usually the 1% spend their time focusing on the 90%, which is the wrong place to spend your time. And so social roots is their attempt to try to figure out how to make it easy for the 1% to take care of the 9% to help the 9% reach into the 90%. So it's trying to sort of set up the kind of distributed system that we're talking about, with the switchboard operators. So again, I think social roots fills a gap. I don't think it replaces anything, but I think it could be what we've talked about as the switchboard, where it's really a tool that helps people push the red button when they need help and figure out how to channel those messages using 6 degrees of separation, sort of being able to let somebody say, I don't know who to turn to about fill in the blank and send it out to a little group who then can decide to send it along to another group. So,
Can I
yeah.
put in a vote for focusing on what this guild is focusing on today? Because that sounds actually great, but it's maybe more the outreach.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's the challenge for me right now is I'm trying to figure out how to parcel out a couple of different things. Yeah, so I can put social roots to the side, but that is, I think again, it's something that doesn't replace anything, but it does fill a gap that we don't necessarily have something for. And I think that there are some things that we should replace. Like I think that there's the way we're using technology right now is not integrated. And well, and actually the one way that this is relevant to the guild here, the social net or the social roots, is that it may be linked to our outreach around, finding shareholders and finding lifeboat members. So it is relevant in terms of that outreach specifically around this stuff. Anyhow, I feel like in terms of, so there was one other. So I think for next steps, I think we should have, to Roland's question about how to use our time today, I don't think we should get into the bylaw items. But I think we could start to list the ones that we want to come back and talk about, like the board composition, should it be 16 or not? So I think we should note any of the topics that we want to come back to, but not go into them. And if you're okay, I think I can start the outreach. I can set up with my proposal of a separate draft that we share out. It's very clear that it will be very clear that this is drafty, and we're trying to bring people on kind of early in the process, or at the right point in the process where changes could get made. And I don't think there are any other next steps. Anyhow, that's Rebecca.
Yeah, I think that's okay, unless there's a way to just send it out with the comments hidden or something, because I'm just a little worried it's going to add to your workload by having multiple copies that you then have to figure out how to integrate. But I trust you to figure out the most streamlined way to do it. I think it would be okay to send it out with a few copies, a few unresolved questions that we're still mulling, and that we specifically, it would even draw their attention to, what do you think?
Yeah.
Rather than pretending it's completely clean and then having to integrate layers.
Yeah.
Documents.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I skipped.
So let's go, one more round. And so is there anything else on next steps or items for discussion, I think is the question at hand. Over to you, Roland.
Sorry, I was for some reason I was waiting for you to unmute me. I don't know why. I really don't know why. Well, and I had a similar comment to Becca's about trying to think of ways of getting the feedback is a little bit like drawing from the wisdom of the circle, the that sort of building on what the person before said to be able to get to something that we never expected, or something
Mhm.
even better than what we could have done individually. So I was thinking of can we do of sending, and so this is just what I was thinking before hearing Becca's comments of um I think that there's a variation that might be possible that I hadn't considered, but I was thinking of asking for help sending a clean document without comments, but then also sending the link a link to the document with comments if they want to also read and add to the comments that already exist. Then it sort of increases the data that we're getting, because really that's
Mm.
kind of like Circle is a way of accreting data in so anyway, I think it's a really interesting way of doing that, of building a database. So I wanted to add to that, and I know I'm not really answering the question. Um, uh, uh, yeah, I'm not really answering the question, but that's what I really wanted to say. So I'm going to pass back to Becca.
Um, I think it would be good to schedule a meeting with the lawyers at some point, or think about when we want to do that. And what was the what was what was the roundabout?
Either points to discuss in the bylaws later or next steps.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't reviewed them since our last meeting, and I feel vague on what are the outstanding issues. So I think I would have to look at them, and maybe with more attention than I have right now, to be able to answer that question.
Mhm. And I
Okay.
think when I don't think I want to send more than one link to anybody, like saying here are two document, or here is this document in two versions that you can read. And I'm thinking about splitting the difference. And I don't think compiling the information will be hard at all, because there's a compare function in Word. And so I can just compare the two documents, and the only things that will show up are, differences. Um, so what I'm thinking about doing, and I like, so splitting the difference, I think I can go through, if you trust me, I'll just make some judgment calls around the comments that are distracting and the comments that are kind of indicating where we have some questions, and then send that out. And then we get a little, the best of both worlds questions that people can bounce off of. And the one thing I'm not sure about in terms of doing that is there's a whole slew of comments in there that are the lawyers need to tell us. Like this is really a question for the lawyers, and this is a question for the lawyers. And some of the people we're talking to are lawyers. So um, I can go both ways in terms of, do we include those comments, because they can be distracting if you're not a lawyer and you don't know the answers to those questions. Anyhow, I guess that's my one thought. And I'm also thinking it would probably be good, even though I know I'm taking on a task here. Um, I'm making my work harder, but I think actually it's making it easier. Is maybe just coming up with a little grid of topics from the comments. So, separate from the document, we can just have, and especially I was thinking about the lawyer issues. Like there's a whole, probably more than half of the things we have in there, I think, are questions for the lawyers. And so just lining them up on a list and being able to say, here's what we think the lawyers can help us with, and here's what we think we still need to talk through. And then we'll all have that, and I can send that around. There aren't that many issues, actually. Going through and looking at it, um, a lot of them were sort of formatting or wording or things like that that were just easy to take care of. And then of the issues that are left, I really think probably 2/3 are just what the lawyers say. And then 1/3 are we probably should talk about this. Um, so that's what I have as my proposed next steps are um, that I will make a copy of the current draft and prune the comments so that only the ones that sort of spark interesting conversation are included. And then with the feedback that we get back, I'll do a compare documents and we'll get one sort of master document. I will create a little summary table, and I'm really just thinking it's going to be like a little for 2 words for the topic, kind of as a placeholder. And then I will start to send out the draft copy, the share copy to, we've already identified a list of like 4 or 5 people to talk to. And then it's just a question of when we bring the lawyers in. And that, it's now or after we get feedback. So, and you know, my choices here are always, there's a part of me that says now, but then we got a bill for, I was really with the invoice, I'm like, what are they billing us for? Like, what have they done in the interim that is worth billing? But uh, so that makes me lean towards, let's wait till we have everything. So we just have one look at this and, give us your final thing and one bill to pay. Um, but in an ideal world, I think I would bring them in now and they could just answer some of these questions and it would be done. So anyhow, that's what I think of as the next steps are creating the summary, pruning the comments, and inviting other people to review the share copy. Over to you, Roland. Anything missing?
Well, I was thinking about the comments having to do with the lawyers, and if on our list there are people who are lawyers, is there a way of rewording those comments so that it becomes more of a question? Is this something for the bylaws, or is this something to talk through, or
Mhm.
is this how can we say in a way that is inviting for people to comment on that, is this something for the lawyers, or is this something that just shouldn't be in the bylaws or something like that?
Mhm.
And my sense, I think, is similar to yours, that it'd be great to be able to just ask the lawyers whenever we want to. But given that the purpose of this exercise of writing the bylaws instead of having the lawyers write the bylaws is to be able to mitigate the costs of having the lawyers. So my sense it would be to gather the data, make revisions to the bylaw so that we have a sense of this is what we think is the closest that we can get to a finished bylaw, and then bring the lawyers in. So that would be my sense.
Mhm. Mhm.
Over to Becca.
Um, I can see it both ways. I do think if there's a chance of getting free legal advice from some of these people, we can avail ourselves of it. And yeah, I mean, rewording some of the comments so that instead of we need to check with the lawyers about this, it's like we need people with legal expertise to weigh in here.
Mhm. Mhm.
Not that they'll all agree with each other, but
Right.
I'm just looking at my budget spreadsheet. It seems like we've got a fair amount of money left in my allocation for the lawyers for this calendar year, and I could potentially put in more next calendar year. So even though it feels like we spent a lot of money, and maybe there's something missing from my spreadsheet, but I see 3 payments in the between 1,000 and 1,600 range, and almost 6,000 left.
Hmm.
This is US dollars. So, just to,
Mm-hmm.
say maybe we don't need to be quite so tight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and it also, in my mind, is sort of a question, relates to the question of, well, how urgently do we need to move things to a different place than they are right now? Like, is this status quo working for now? I mean, I know when I was there, it's clear like you guys have a lot of ideas, but they're mostly on hold until
Mm-hmm.
can move forward. And so, or not mostly, but there's a lot of things on hold. And so if putting more money up front can move us faster, I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
might lean that direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I trust you, Ben, to like figure out which comments are ones that, I mean, maybe some of them will be so simple you'll just make the changes rather than having also a backlog of simple things to
Mm-hmm.
change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whatever you-
Well, good point. I at the very least, um, I like splitting the difference. And actually, I feel like that's in keeping with the both and spirit of and navigating tensions and etc. Um, because I think it's let's see how much feedback we can get in, say, the next 2 weeks, and then make a decision 2 weeks from, like at our next meeting. Then we make our last decisions based on however much feedback we can get. We can still shop it out. We can still invite other people to comment on it. Um, oh yeah, and that's actually on my list too, is that Heather agreed to doing like a workshop time to, go through it. So yeah, that's I think my splitting the difference is because I don't think if we sent it to the lawyers right now that it would necessarily speed things up. Um, versus sending it in 2 weeks if it's cleaned up a little bit in 2 weeks. Yeah, I think that would be. And in terms of, I do feel like I am feeling a lot of, especially this is how is it November already? It's sort of there. I do have a timeline in my head, but I think we're close. I think we're, what I mean close, I think we're close to having what we need in place for the next steps. Because I think the next steps are really getting ready to do presentations where we say, this is what we're pitching. This is what the legal structure looks like. This is what a share costs. This is, and I think we're really close to having that level of, and, still with an opening of, because for setting up the co-op, we're going to want some people signing on the dotted line to start the co-op, right? So we're going to have to talk to people about this is what it looks like before we get there. Um, Anyhow, I had an extra coffee this morning because I had an early meeting and I'm feeling the caffeine take over. So I'm going to pass over to Roland.
Yeah, I think my sense is I've mapped it out. So my sense is data first. So whatever we can get, I like the idea of whatever we can get in the next couple of weeks, and then if we feel like in terms of the amounts allocated, meeting with the lawyers, sort of data collating it, looking at the bylaws with the collated data, making changes, going to the lawyers, taking their information, revamping the bylaws because hopefully there won't be very many changes, but that we will get whatever we need clarified then, and then do a final revamp of the bylaws, and then getting confirmation from the lawyers that everything's tickety-boo, and then incorporation. So that's sort of how I'm seeing it. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that after Halloween, it's the gap between until the holiday season. And so in terms of just keeping that in mind in terms of timing for things. So over to Becca.
Tickety boo, is that what you said? That's a new term for me. Is that a widely shared term or is that a
It's
Ben?
no, it's a common term.
Yep.
It's British.
Oh, I think you're right. I
Yeah, I
think
think it's British, but yeah, it's pretty common.
it sounds very Mary Poppinsy.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And with the caveat about the holidays could slow things down with those lawyers and stuff.
All right, well,
But
we got a plan, I think. Awesome. Good meeting. Keep it tight. Tickety foo.
I wanted to also add when you were saying like we're going to be ready to start making presentations, and I was going to jump in and say, and I've got the haircut to do it with.
That's right. Yes, and I can wear it up and back, and it was really fun. And actually, I forgot. I've always liked getting my hair cut, and just it was my latest experiment in what does my hair look like long, and then getting my hair cut, I was like, oh yeah, this feels so good. And the woman who did it, she does so she cuts your hair and then she takes a hot towel and wraps it around your head and does this sort of scalp massage after cutting your hair, and it was just I was like melting into the chair. It was just whatever the cost of the haircut, it was all worth it for that hot towel massage. So anyhow, onward and upward, and keep everybody in the loop.
Any prayers you can send our way for next?
Oh, I know, and I'm tracking. I've sent my, I mailed my ballot in, and I've got tracking on it, and it's due on the 5th. And I'm just like, it's just, so.
It, are you using some US address or they just let you?
Well, yeah. My last U.S. address is my permanent registration for voting.
Is
So
that
I'm a permanent overseas citizen. So
is it a Wisconsin
yeah, yeah,
at our address?
yeah, yeah. It's Gilson Street, my old house on Gilson Street.
Because
And
you've been getting various things at 2116 Jefferson that are like, you haven't voted in the last such and such number of elections and blah blah blah. Like
no, well, I've always voted. Yeah, that's my
independent.
last legal address was Gilson Street. So that's my what is it 1208 Gilson Street, 1209, something like that.
Cool.
It's really easy. I've actually the Wisconsin, I don't know what it's like in other states, but the system they've got set up is super intuitive, easy to use. I clicked in, I printed my ballot out, and it was off in the mail the same day, no, next day. But yeah. Anyhow, that was partly that time thing. It was like I was watching all the stuff about the election. I was like, I should probably go vote. And then, not realizing the delay in, and I did the highest level of, other than a courier service, I did the highest level of speed I could get, and it's still,
Yeah, they've been dismantling the postal service here, so
yeah, because it made it to the US pretty quick,
yeah.
sort of like in the US the day after, and it's now sitting in Los Angeles. Well, the last time I checked, it was sitting in Los Angeles being sorted. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I should have put ballot on the outside or something. Well, no, actually, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, the times we live in.
All right.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
Bye. Happy canvassing.